Hi, everybody. I'm here with Adam Sachs, who is a three-time James Beard Award-winning food, travel, and lifestyle writer and editor, and formerly the editor of Saveur. And he's also a Tufts alum, as am I. And we'll talk about that and more. Actually, we're going to talk about Silversea. We're going to talk about a new ship. We're going to talk about a new culinary adventure, which isn't so new, but it still hasn't happened yet, and a new podcast. And this is Insider Travel Report. So now, normally you're in New York City, Brooklyn, in fact, but where are you now?
Normally, what's normally? I don't remember normal anymore. Normally I'm in Brooklyn. We are up the Hudson a little bit, near a lake, near Cold Spring, probably not too far from you. Yeah. So we have water here. So we're not on a ship, but I can see water from.
So was this the normal family vacation, or was this sort of a?
No, friend of friends. We found a place. It was available. We were up here for 3 weeks in July, and loved being away from the city, and found this place for September. So we're going to start in with we're working, and we've got remote schooling happening. So not quite a vacation, but it's nice to be near the water.
Well, and so everybody's good, huh?
Yeah, so far so good. Thank you.
So listen, you have a very cool background. Let's start with you graduated Tufts.
Long time ago.
Yeah, and then let's work our way to Silverseas, because I don't really know the story.
Okay, so yeah, I come to the world of cruising in a pretty unusual fashion. I come from the world of, like you, storytelling. Been a journalist, mostly a food and travel writer and editor for most of my career. I did go to Tufts. I never took a journalism class, which probably shows in my writing. But I was an English major, a comp lit guy, and I love the idea of working in words somehow. And moved to New York. I was a fact checker at Condé Nast Traveler for a little while when I first got there. So I got a taste of travel journalism. And then when Time Out New York launched in New York a million years ago, I ended up editing the food section for the first couple of years. So I really fell in love with food, not just as something to consume and enjoy, right, but a beat to cover. I loved it. Was a way into covering the city, and I love the people. And it was early. There was no food. There was no internet. There was no food media. And there was New York Magazine. There's obviously the Times was it still is the most respected, but there wasn't this glut of information. There wasn't. There wasn't reader-generated reviews. There weren't reader-generated reviews, really. So we got to write about it in a way that was exciting, and I loved that as a beat. And then I started to realize I love restaurants, but I love to find out more about food, where it comes from, trace it back to its source. So when I moved on I was a staff writer at GQ for about 5 years. And I would always try to get stories that would send me abroad somewhere. And even if the story was about something completely different, I would investigate the restaurants and bars and figure out which chefs, to look into, and just try to find food stories along the way. So that really became my thing, that intersection of food and travel.
So then how did you get the attention of Silversea, or was it the other way around?
So I had been, we're compacting a few years here. I'd been the editor-in-chief of a magazine called Saveur, which is a food and travel magazine. And it turns out that Barbara Muckerman, the CMO of Silversea, is a reader and a fan of the magazine. And when I left Saveur, I was kind of, going back into writing and figuring out next steps. And a mutual friend from the publishing world introduced us. And she gave me a call, and I was on vacation with my family in Italy, and I was listening. I was in this field, and really, one bar of service, and I'm trying to listen very closely to understand what she's saying. And I assumed that it was going to be about, because I come from media, that it would be about maybe helping with the website or doing some videos or some content. And as I'm listening, I'm realizing that either I'm misunderstanding completely, or she's got a really ambitious idea and wide open kind of openness to coming up with a culinary program for this new ship that then was, I don't even think that construction had started on. And she was looking for ideas and looking for a partner in that. And to my great surprise and delight, she brought me on board. We were just talking the other day. The first time
you were in Italy, so it wasn't a far trip.
Well, I was on vacation. I didn't see her that time, but we got together. They had a ship going from New York to Bermuda, and they had some architects on board to talk about the new construction on Silver Moon. And she said, all right, just come aboard. And Manfredi was there, and Roberto was there, and all the architects were there. And they didn't know what to make of me. So in the meeting, I was listed as architect. So, and all the other real architects were looking at me like, what the hell is this guy doing here? Who is this unknown competing architect from his own firm we've never heard of? And that was very exciting because I just got thrown into it. And we started that trip really talking about, what would a program look like that would answer this question of how do you travel deeper through the lens of food and food culture. And
so how did the name SALT come, which is sea and land taste?
The backstory is a little funny. The working name, so it started with this idea of the space on board the ship, Silver Moon, and it was going to be a kind of test kitchen, culinary hub of activity, a place to do cooking lessons and demos and classes. And Barbara had been thinking of it or they had been internally calling it the Culinary Discovery Center. And then in emails, it would be CDC. And then we realized the CDC is really not what we want to call this. And
this is before.
This is a lot done before. Yeah. Imagine now if we were launching with, a food product on a cruise ship called CDC. So luckily we handed it over. We wrote up a brief about, describing what this project is, the theme of it, the vibe we were going for. And it was actually the internal creative team at Silversea came back with a really, out of Monaco, came back with a really amazing document that had, a huge number of ideas. And in there was this acronym. And we kept, a lot of the other ideas were a little more straightforward and they kind of described it, in a more traditional way. But Barbara and I kept coming back to that acronym SALT that there's something about, feels like something out of a spy novel or something. It feels, there's something romantic about this name, this acronym, and it does really describe what we're doing, which is connecting what you eat on land to what you experience and learn about and taste and kind of dive further into at sea. So we ended up with that and have been pretty happy with it.
So what's it like planning a food adventure like that when you're hit with a pandemic? I mean, obviously the food's spoiling. What do you do? How do you plan?
I mean, like everything. What we're all doing, which is, you put the brakes on a little bit and you wonder what the world is going to look like when you come through the other side. I think the hardest thing is, there's obviously the key details of when we're sailing again and where we'll be able to go and timing and schedules and all that. And most of that is, all of that's out of my control. But then
what's the latest on that?
I'd leave it to Silversea to say, but I mean, we're taking receipt of the ship at the end of October, and the plan is to sail in November. So we'll see. I hope that's the case. One way or another, we'll have this beautiful new ship at the end of October because they're going to start building the next one. But on my end, my part of it, it's really about, the project became thinking about what does the world look like when you get to the other side. A lot of what we're doing is talking to chefs, to restaurateurs, to culinary experts, to cookbook authors, trying to find the best people in each port we're going to kind of tell the food story of that region and that culture, and then find people to bring on board and continue that education and that journey on board. So obviously people's lives are, really turned upside down, and a lot of restaurants, unfortunately, are not going to make it, or if they do, they're going to be in a situation where they're struggling and scrambling to get back on their feet. So it may not be the time that people can say, well, yeah, I know in X number of months I'm free to come on board. On the other hand, people I think will be very happy to welcome travelers back, to their country and their city and their port, and happy to have the business again. So I think the people I've talked to are very excited that the fact that they're getting a call about this kind of project, the fact that people are starting to schedule this kind of thing again, I think says to them that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I think one practical thing is we need to find ways that we can do a lot of this programming in-house. There'll be a dedicated staff host for the SALT lab, which is the test kitchen, the place where we'll do cooking demos and classes. And so if we have a situation where, for whatever reason, we can't get into a port, or the person that we had identified who would be great to bring on board to run a cooking class can't come, we're going to have that programming designed and sort of ready to go on hand and delivered by the SALT host. So just to make sure that we can really deliver on the promise of SALT independent of if we're able to go to a particular port. Well,
let's backtrack a little bit. So one of the things I remember about SALT was that doesn't matter where the ship goes, you're going to get the cuisine of the area and you're going to learn about it, because on the facilities on the ship itself has this SALT lab and also a SALT bar where you get the drinks and the fruits from the area. And I remember Mark Conroy saying, what a logistic nightmare of getting all the foods together. And that was just without COVID. So now what you're describing is the logistical tricks that now you have to jump through hoops just to get people on board, off board. What are the, how is it going to change? It's obviously going to be a little stricter. But I could see where they would be excited you're talking.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the logistical, part is ambitious to begin with. And so, but these are what these people, are experts in, and this is the bit what their genius is at. So my part is just sort of saying, here's, consulting on menus, here's the food story. So yeah, just to back up, as you're saying, there are a couple of different elements of SALT on board. So there's the SALT lab, which is where we'll do cooking classes, demos, conversations, Q&As, maybe films about food with the snacks, but a place where you can really roll up your sleeves and cook and have these intimate experiences. It's also a place where we'll have a library of cookbooks and food memoirs, and you can drop by, and kind of a hub for people who are going on the SALT experiences, which are the Shore X side. So the SALT lab on board, there's the Shore X side, and then there's SALT kitchen and SALT bar. So SALT kitchen takes over the space that was Indochine on the sister ship. That space was previously a restaurant called Indochine. So it's the second largest restaurant on board, and the idea is that it changes menus. It will change menus constantly based on where we are in the world. So it's sort of a restaurant that, the menu reflects where you are, which is an idea I really love, because I think this isn't replacing something. This is adding an alternative, adding this experience. So if you're a guest who, sails with us because you have your table and the thing you order at Lantide or at any of the other restaurants, that's not going away. What this does is it broadens your options for other kinds of dining experiences. And so and if you're really into it, you can come more than once, and by nature it will changing, throughout the journey. So there'll be about half the menu roughly will kind of reflect a little more broadly the region you're going through. And then the other half is almost like a daily special, and that's really more granularly connected to where you are. And then SALT Bar, as you said, is kind of the bar version of that. So
what I love about it is that the experience is you're thrown deep into the foodie experience at every level, everywhere you turn. It's like it's a foodie's trip, really.
I think so. If this is your thing, you could really make a heavy sort of culinary focus trip out of the entire cruise. If you're not, it's designed to find you somehow and make sure that you get a taste of it. So there's a roving bar cart that has SALT. We'll have a small number of SALT cocktails that represent that
region, right?
That journey, that region. So the idea is, we'll find you with a welcome cocktail, or hopefully you'll spend one night at SALT Kitchen, come to a SALT Bar for a wine tasting or a mixology class, even if you don't see yourself as someone who wants to spend their vacation, taking cooking classes, I think there's the programming will be interesting enough and differ enough from sort of the standard cooking classes you see on land or on other lines. So
what you're saying is that you could go off ship and you can have experiences, but that culinary experience is still back at the ship, which I think is wonderful.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's and finding those connections so that when you're in a port and you go on a culinary experience, it's not just over when you leave. That if we have a day at sea,
continue back on the ship,
continue and go deeper in it and kind of put things in context and step back and say, okay, why, how did that ingredient get there, and what's the story of that culture? Or we saw that, now let's see that they make a version of this in this next country we're going to. We'll have a cooking class, or meet an expert who knows the region.
Yeah, and you hit on it, because and you're in a region, certain things grow, and then the culinary grows from what is available.
Yeah, it's never. I mean, I think it's when food is interesting, it's never sort of disconnected from where you are. I mean, there's a kind of restaurant that I call international fancy food, and it's fine. If you're in a city you don't know well, and there's a restaurant that does that well, and you're well taken care of, there's nothing wrong with that. But you don't, if you go to that kind of restaurant, you don't come away with an appreciation of where you don't feel like you've really connected to where you are. And food can really do that, and you can, and it does it in this kind of physical, sort of almost immediate way. And you can take it, and it's flavors, it smells, and then it's the stories behind things. And so I think, as much as I like a good meal, I think there's something even more nourishing about learning about, why that meal is the way it is, or how people came to cook it that way, or this ingredient came from somewhere else through trade. Or I don't want it to feel like every port is a chapter of a food encyclopedia, and you're just giving a list of ingredients and key dishes and a few signature cocktail or something, because then it gets boring. It needs to be. There's so many different ways to tell these stories, and a lot of times it's through people, or through a particular producer or farm or winemaker, or a story about. I was just talking to a journalist friend of mine who's doing some consulting for us, and we were talking about how the importance of gnocchi in Argentina, and that there's a day, I'm forgetting the name of it, but there's a day where it's basically international. I mean, it's National Gnocchi Day in Argentina, and it was sort of the end of the month, and you're out of money, and you had to pay rent, and there's nothing left in the pantry but potatoes, and so you made gnocchi. And of course, there's such a strong Italian population there. But then if that, so it sounds like it's kind of an imported food, obviously, but then that goes on for decades and decades and decades, and then it becomes an Argentinian tradition and an Argentinian food. And so even something like learning to make gnocchi while you're in Argentina, or while you're sailing around that region, and then learning about how it got there, and talking to chefs from Buenos Aires, chefs from other parts of Argentina about, well, do they make the basic recipe is the same, but how does it differ from its gnocchi cousins in Italy? I love that stuff. I mean, that's there are versions of this that could be where you go deep into history, or it's all about one dish, or it's about a person, and it's just finding the story. And that's where coming at it from as a journalist, coming at it from a storytelling perspective, I think that's what I bring to it, because I always, again, like, I love to eat, I love to cook, I love a nice meal, but the meal is over, and you might remember it, but you can't still taste it. But you can remember the experience you had, or the connection, or the light bulb goes off because you realize why it's cooked a certain way, or you meet the person who made it, and it's just, there's so many other ways to really connect with where you are through food than just having a nice meal and being done with it.
I'm not really good with history, but when it's history with food, somehow I remember that.
Yeah, it's easy to read because it connects. It's pleasure and the facts. Yeah, no, I've been lucky enough to go to a lot of wine producing regions and tour great wineries, or go to dinners and have a lot of great wine, and just by the virtue of writing about this stuff. But if you're talking to me about, when it starts to feel like math class and there's just too much, data to try to memorize, it goes away. But if you talk to me about, the people and this person's grandmother or grandfather and the land and soil and why it's made this way, and you have it with an amazing meal, that sticks out. And that's what it just adds to the pleasure and amplifies the pleasure of the experience.
That reminds me, weren't we last together with Gaia?
Yes.
Got the wine experience from her family? Yeah,
speaking of great wine and a great story. So Gaia is the godmother of Silver Moon. She and her siblings run Gaia Winery in Italy, which is, they're one of the really well-respected family names in Italian wine. And she's also you met her, she's incredibly charming and beautiful and embodies this Italian style, and the wine is amazing. So it's the best of everything. So I'm so happy that she's involved with Silver Moon.
So have you, I lost track. Did you see Silver Moon at any point yet? Have you been on it once or no?
I was on for the float out, so I saw it kind of raw.
Right. Not since.
I haven't seen it. I've seen pictures from the staff going to visit it, and I had sea trials recently, maybe even last week, and so it's amazing to me to go from. It's very exciting for me coming from from a different world where. You make a magazine and that seems exciting. It's physical and it's out in the world. And this, we were, sitting in a conference room on a ship, giving my opinion about, what this space on this theoretical new ship should look like. And now it really exists, kind of blows my mind. It's very exciting.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. So now let's move on to, we're all trying to virtually experience the travel we hope to do soon. And in keeping with that, you have a new podcast, the S.A.L.T Lab Radio. Let's talk about that for a moment.
So the podcast, thank you for bringing it up. I'm pretty excited about it. The podcast started because was talking to Barbara again about, how do we sort of build more storytelling around this, and how can we maybe do some advanced work and go out. Part of the research when we were planning the float out in Ancona, we were looking for a kind of salt experience we could do in the area around Ancona, and an Italian friend of mine who's helping us with the salt experiences there in various ports around. She's a journalist and a cookbook author and really knows everything there is to know and everyone you need to know in Italy in the world of food. And she introduced us to a pasta maker called Mancini, which is up in the hills in Fermo, right, and near Ancona. And pasta is just one of these things that we kind of take for granted as it's something you buy in a supermarket, and it's every strand of spaghetti kind of looks the same, especially in dried pasta. And this is a guy, Mancini, who's a third generation wheat farmer, and he decided that selling wheat as a commodity and barely breaking even was not for him. And he went to business school, and then he trained. He went and studied how pasta is made, and he took his family's wheat farm and decided that he was going to make the best pasta in Italy. And most Italian pasta, I know this is a bit of a digression, but forgive me, but most dry pasta in Italy, the ingredients in the pasta travel 1,000 kilometers to become pasta. He makes it only from the wheat that's right around him. So he has this really modern, very sleek, looks like a Prada store. It's a beautiful building on a hillside up above, about 45 minutes from Ancona, where the ship is made, was being built. And he can stand and point to all his wheat fields all around. So they come about 100 feet. And the pasta is amazing. It's the only pasta it's made 100% from Italian wheat. Now several Michelin 3-star Italian chefs have started using it. It's really fascinating. So anyway, we went and did a dinner with
But
him.
you can't apologize for digressing because this is what SALT is.
This is what, yeah. This is me when I start to gesticulate and maybe salivate a little bit. Hopefully, you don't see too much.
And I'm sure the water is local water, but keep going.
Water, it's always comes down to water. It's like the New York bagel. You can't supposedly you can't make it without that. But so when we were doing the float out, we were looking for stories to do again, and I went out and I met the Mancini family and talked to them, and they invited us up. So we went to the shipyard, and we went up into the hills afterwards, and we had a tour of the wheat fields, and then the production facility. Again, it's quite small, and then a beautiful dinner under kind of starlight outside. And we did side-by-side tasting with kind of industrial dry pasta and it's a different world. And so we're thinking, this is a guy, like, it's great to have this on the menu, but how do you give the guests, or how do you give people who are interested in this kind of stuff a taste of this if they're not on board yet, or they're not, lucky enough to come to this little dinner? So a podcast seemed like a great idea. I love food TV. There's so much great stuff, but there's only sort of so much you can watch someone put something in their mouth and say, oh, how delicious it is. I think audio is an interesting format because you really get a chance to hear these people's stories and listen to them talk and get the context, and it's storytelling.
And we are, ITR is now Inside Travel Report. We are doing podcasts. In fact, this will be a podcast as well.
Oh, nice. Okay. So you know the strength of it, and I think there's also something where clearly the Silversea guests, the audience is their podcast listeners. One of the things I like also is that if you're going on a cruise, if you're planning a cruise somewhere where we're doing a story, where we have a SALT experience. I love the idea of being able to send guests, a podcast to listen to before if they know they've booked a trip with us, going to a region that we covered in one of our stories, or where we have SALT experiences planned. Also a way to entice people, and also when you're on board, you've got a lot. This is something you could listen to in your guest room. Something we'll have over the entertainment system. You've got time, and it's a way to have a kind of transporting food experience without having to get off the ship.
Well, you have two now. How many do you intend to have? I hope a lot.
We intend to have a lot, yeah. So we kind of I'm working with a guy named Howie Kahn, who's a good friend of mine. Also comes from the world of magazine writing, food and travel. He does a lot of profiles for WSJ magazine, for the Wall Street Journal. We're both ex-GQ guys, and I've known him for a long time. He and his wife started a podcast company called Free Time Media, really focusing on the luxury hospitality sector. And so he and I kind of pitched Barbara, and we said, this is, we know we want to do a podcast. SALT is a perfect, format for this. Let's do so we were going to do a kind of mini series of 6 episodes. And then this year we were supposed to be on the road all the time, recording, a series, season 2. So we recorded 5 episodes before we had to stop traveling. So we've got those coming out. I think what's nice about having them now, as you said, we're all yearning to travel again. It's kind of a weird time to be in this industry because it's great because we all want to go, but we're sort of sitting on our hands waiting for the green light. But I think this has been a nice, in a way, it's not what we intended, not the way we intended to launch it, but in a way it's worked out because this is something you can do from home. This is something that can continue to kind of whet your appetite for this sort of travel. And we were lucky enough. I mean, there are a lot of podcasts about food and travel, and not to take anything away from any of them. There's some great stuff, but one thing that we're extremely lucky about with this is that we have the budget and the opportunity to really go to these places. So the first episode, we went to Trieste and then crossed over the border to Slovenia and kind of really did a sort of deep dive on what cooking and eating and winemaking in this sort of fascinating border region looks like. Then another episode, we went to Albania, which was amazing because it was a totally different sort of story. I mean, Trieste is sort of a unusual part of Italy, but I think the Albanian cuisine is really something that most people, myself included, don't know much about if you're not familiar with the area. Our guide there was a guy named Faisal Demirai, who's a Albanian-American chef. He comes from Yonkers, actually, but he's a sous chef at his grandfather was an Albanian freedom fighter, and they had to get out of the country. So he's fiercely proud of the homeland and Albanian cuisine. But his day job is he's a sous chef at Noma in Copenhagen. So he works at arguably one of the best restaurants in the world. Rene Redzepi, who's his boss, the head chef and owner at Noma, his father is ethnically Albanian, so he's interested in this, and he's given Faisal time on the side to run a kind of culinary nonprofit. So we were lucky enough to tag along with him on a mission there.
And you said before, all we can do now is we want to travel, but all we can do is sit on our hands. And I was thinking, well, at least that we're not touching our faces, so that's a good thing.
It's true.
But I didn't want to interrupt your flow because you were on a roll.
It's a good joke.
Yeah, but anyway,
can I give a little plug for where you can listen to the podcast? You can download the podcast, subscribe, leave extravagantly positive reviews and feedback on Spotify or Apple Music or Google Play, or go to the Silversea website. We're also putting up news stories and interviews and stories inspired by the episodes on the website with each episode. And the next one drops on September 10th. So check it out.
Here we are. We're sitting on our hands, but we're thinking about travel. We have Silver Moon to look forward to. We have the podcasts to get us there. I want to thank you for talking to us.
Thanks, Alan. It's been a pleasure.
And this is Alan Fine for Insider Travel Report.